Hello, hello. It is Halley LOL here, and we're back at the Spontaneous Mutation podcast. Thanks for tuning in again, or maybe this is your first episode. Who knows? We're happy to have you either way. Now, you're listening to a song today in the background called Temporary, and it's about a really, really rough day that I had. One thing that I've always struggled with is this idea of self-pity versus self-compassion. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. I always felt kind of stuck in this space. I remember going to a neurofibromatosis clinic in Oakland, California, and I met with the plastic surgeon there, and he spent the whole time shaming me basically for asking if it was time for an intervention and telling me, he usually works on much more severe cases. My face was nothing. I should feel lucky. And, it made me feel terrible. And obviously, doctors, I have a lot of respect for what they do. And so I was like, okay. That was the message. Like, I should feel lucky. I'm going to shut up about this. But then there's this other end, which is the general public. One time I had this colleague kind of corner me in our little break room and say, you don't have to live like this. My brother's a plastic surgeon and he can help you. And, I did not have to kindly explain to her, but I did explain to her that no, this condition requires somebody who is familiar with it because there's tumors attached to nerves. You can't just go in and cut things. And the reason I bring this up today is because I've always felt really stuck in that space of you don't have a reason to complain. This is not nearly as bad as it could be. And the other end, which is cue whatever horrible thing someone wants to tell me in public somewhere. And I found myself in this space of kind of unreconciled grief because I never thought that I had a reason to grieve, right? It wasn't bad enough. So then I just never really grieved. And I've come to realize over the years that grief that goes nowhere is just suffering. And I think I'm not the only one who probably suffers in this way of you feel like you're not entitled to your grief. And I can recognize now that this was internalized ableism. It was, I should be stronger than this. I should get over this. So this song, Temporary, is really me coming to terms with needing to show myself a lot more self-compassion. So yeah, I've been thinking about pity, which I feel like kind of can be manipulative or objectify somebody, versus compassion, which is actually seeing somebody as a full human being and realizing that maybe you're not so far from where they are at that moment. So I'm really excited today because our guest is Rasheera Dopson. She is a storyteller, she is a creator, and she's been leaving a trail for other people to find their way. And she's really helped me out. So I'm very excited to have her on the podcast. All right, let's get going. So Rasheera Dopson is a disability justice advocate. She's an author, a scholar, a speaker, a content creator, and a researcher. Rasheera has a master's in public health, and she's currently a PhD student at Northern Arizona University. Without further ado, please enjoy Rasheera's episode. This is called Temporary. The only constant is change. Right. Hello. Welcome, Rasheera. To get started, you are such a multifaceted person. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about yourself.
Oh, that's such a compliment. I'm starting to embrace the term of being multifaceted. Even because I'm like, I guess I do various forms of media advocacy, outreach, all the things, all the time. So I always like to say, I'm a person that wears many hats, depending on the space that I am, determines which hat I'm going to be wearing. And sometimes I could wear multiple hats in one space, and sometimes I don't. Um, I'm a podcaster as well. Uh, I have my own podcast, a host of the Womanhood and Disability podcast, where we talk about the intersectional experiences of women specifically living with disabilities. I really just wanted to create a digital space where I can learn from other women who knew what it was like to live with a disability and all the nuance that they don't tell you about. Um, I always like to say too, like, they don't really give you a guidebook on how to be disabled. You just kind of, especially if you're born with your disabilities, you just kind of live your life and you learn a lot of things as you go. You learn, you adapt, and you cope. And one of the things that I really struggled with in my own personal journey was like how to be a woman, like, just things that are related to womanhood, such as your appearance, confidence, sexuality, dating, all the things, going to school, just showing up and being a confident woman. And so that's one of my babies. I'm also a self-published author. My first book is my memoir called Beauty with a Twist, where I chronicle my life story of growing up with disability and chronic illness, and how my faith has really been an anchor in that whole journey and still is. Um, and then my second self-published book is my children's book called Different Like Me. I released it last year. Actually, it'll be a week last year or next year. I should probably celebrate that. Um, I'm I'm always that person that kind of forgets because I'm like constantly going, but I'm learning how to slow down and really lean in and celebrate the moments. Um, and that book is really special to me because I love reading. I love growing up reading, and I did not see myself represented in children's book. And that's something that I always wished that if I would have had that representation, I think it would have helped a lot because I really struggled with self-esteem issues growing up, and sometimes I still do. And so to be able to give that book to other children and say, like, there are other types of disabilities, and it's not weird that you don't have an ear or different things like that. This is, this can be a tool. And so that's another one of my babies. I love it. It's super whimsical, super cute, really short. Because I think, who likes a long children's book, right?
Yes.
Some of them can get pretty lengthy. Um, and then by day, I guess my day-to-day thing, I'm a PhD, a full-time PhD student at Northern Arizona University. I'm a diversity and excellence fellow as well. So I do a lot of disability related health research and looking at the health inequities and disparities and disability populations and other marginalized groups as well. I do public speaking. Um, I do advocacy, which kind of loops into the public speaking, uh, social media advocacy, different things, content creation. So I like to say overall, and I probably should have made this a lot more short and concise. I just use different multimedia platforms and ways of advocacy and storytelling to share my story and hoping that that will bring greater education and awareness and change to people with disabilities, especially women with disabilities. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's what stood out to me the most, and because I've listened to your podcast, I've listened to your other interviews, and it's just, Rasheera, you're somebody who's has a handle of your story, and you can tell you've internalized it and used it to heal, and now you're bringing that to help other people, right? To piece together those parts of themselves.
Yeah.
And you talk a lot about intersectionality. I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit more background on intersectionality.
Oh,
Um, Kimberly Crenshaw, I know, coined that in what
yeah,
the is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, intersectionality is my jam, and it was really for those of you who don't know, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, she is a legal scholar who came up with a framework to kind of understand how Black women were being impacted in a legal system. A perfect example is that, when when they were looking at legal cases and litigation, they were saying, well, we know we have a legal precedence for discrimination because on race. And then we have a precedence for discrimination on gender. But then she realized there was a group of Black, and she used Black women as an example, that there really wasn't any legal precedence to see how both of those identities were causing different forms of oppression simultaneously. And so I think intersectionality is a really great framework. I know it's kind of like a buzzword now, and I think people have a little bit misappropriated it and not really having a true understanding for what it is, but in a really simplistic way, intersectionality is a framework in which we understand how people with marginalized identities experience different forms of oppression. And so I love this framework and I've really come to embody it. Now, even though Dr. Kenshaw, she does not look at disability, it is also in the lens of intersectionality. And I've come to embody it because I started to realize, especially as I transition from a child to an adult living with a disability, they're very different experiences. When you're a child, you have, most people have their family members to their parents to advocate for them. And you really don't experience the brunt of that discrimination because you're a child. You really shouldn't know what discrimination is. And then when I became an adult, it was just, I just kept on getting, I had a lot of really terrible experiences in the workplace in which I was being fired, in which I was being bullied, and I just could not put my finger on it. And then I was like, well, are people not being nice to me? Are they stigmatizing me because it's a Black thing? I'm a Black woman. But then I was like, well, maybe it's a disability thing. And then it dawned on me it's both. It's both that I'm experiencing barriers and challenges because I'm living with multiply marginalized identities that systemically experience discrimination and stigma, but I embody all three. And so I started looking at intersectionality to see, we talk about how people with disabilities experience discrimination, but then that becomes more exacerbated when you add on another marginalized identity on that. So then a perfect example, and I had a mentor tell me this one time. She's like, sometimes do you ever feel like when you walk into a room and you're just like, what is it? I was like, yeah, that feeling of, are you looking at me weird because I'm the only Black person? Are you looking at me weird because I have a facial difference and deformity? Are you looking at me weird because I'm the only girl? And she was like, that's what you're experiencing. And so I realized that there are people, even within the disability community, who are experiencing more exacerbated forms of discrimination because they're living with other marginalized identities, such as Black people with disabilities, Latinx, AAPI community, Indigenous, queer, transgender, gender minorities, wherever you may live geographically, that can also be a level of discrimination because, healthcare or health access to health services may look a lot differently in the Northeast than it does in the South. And so I learned these things, and the advocate in me was just like, we got to change this. Like, no, like, we got to change this. And so then I decided to go back to school. I got my master's in public health, and I was like, how can I use my lived experience as a person with a disability to bring more equity to Black and Brown people with disabilities, to bring more equity to women with disabilities? Because I realized, men, like when we think of disability, we typically think of a male wheelchair user, but no one's thinking about the woman who has a facial difference, who's experiencing social stigma, who is not having her OBGYN understand that on top of her chronic illness and disabilities, she's also a woman who might desire to be a mother one day, who might desire to be married one day or in a platonic or romantic relationship. What does that look like for her? What does her health landscape look like for her? And so I've been now on this pathway for the past, God, I feel like I've been in school forever now, for the past 5 years, and unpacking that and using that knowledge, translating my lived experience knowledge to bringing more awareness on how intersectionality is applicable to disabled people and how it is, I believe, a key and a tool to unlock more areas of freedom for disabled people as a whole.
Amazing. I'm s- I'm so glad you're here, Rasheera. Thank
It's
you.
like, I could talk about it like all day, so
Yeah.
stop me.
Well, we have to talk about it. We
Yeah.
absolutely we have to talk about it. There's so many directions we could go here. I think one thing, I was listening to one of your other interviews, and it kind of got me thinking about the things that I wish I had known. Just you talking about having a children's book, and one thing I wish I had, which the disability community, has taught me, is like I wish I had known that you're just always going to get stared at, you know? That's one. And then the other thing is, you're always going to get rejected from your health insurance. That's the other. There's just these two things you need to know as an adult. And they're not fair, but they just are. And I'm wondering if you could speak on those
Yeah,
things and more. I'm sure there are more rules, but just,
yeah.
these cruel things that we kind of have to learn, right? As adults that are just, it shouldn't be this way, but
Uh,
here we are.
it's our reality. It's our lived experience. It is the hard pill that we have to swallow if you do not want to live the rest of your life angry. And once you swallow that pill, you can move on. And I think that is something, especially when I'm talking to parents or to people who are really struggling in that acceptance of their disabled life, like swallow the pill. Swallow the pill. And I still have to swallow the pill because sometimes it's just like, it sucks. It's not fair. You're right. It sucks. It's not fair. But this is my reality. And I literally told someone this yesterday. I was doing another interview. I was like, unless I were to be reborn again, like reincarnated, I cannot get away from this body of being disabled. So I either have to learn how to deal with it and accept, I'm a Christian, accept what I believe God has allowed me to live in the body that I was born with. You're going to live the rest of your life miserable. And I know I distinctly went through a relearning of that acceptance when I had surgery last year. Um, and I had some traumatic experience connected to that surgery. I went through some ear reconstruction, and the goal was to, make my ear, I guess, more aesthetically pleasing and just update it because the last surgery I had, I was 7 years old, and the 7-year-old ear did not match my 30-plus-year-old body. So they wanted to upgrade and do some different things like that. Great. What we did not anticipate was the operation was to take away one thing and it ended up adding another. And that's kind of that's kind of that's something common, especially with people who have craniofacial conditions. It's like you do surgery to get rid of one thing and sometimes you get the side effects of something other. And so one of the side effects was that my ear, I had a skin graft. And what I did not know is that darker skin, it's harder to regenerate and for that skin to grow back and come into its full color. Skin grafts are very traumatic processes that happen to the skin. And so here we are at the 3 month mark. My ear is still pink. It's still like not, it was very unsightly looking. I'm like, there's hope that my color is going to come back and it's finally going to look normal.
Right.
My ear does not look normal. It is very pigmented. I have to put makeup on it to have this color blend in. And for those of you who will watch, they're like splotches of whiteness on the ear. Obviously, I do not have white skin. So it's a little, my opinion, it was a little unsightly. And when I first came out of surgery, it was definitely like, I couldn't even, I was so crippled in leaving the house because just going to the store, I would get so many stares, and I knew it looked bad, and I was just like, this is not what we planned. And so I went through all last year, one, grieving the ear that I had grown up with, that I had become acclimated to, that I was okay with wearing outside and into public, and now having to embrace a new ear with a new scar, with a new side effect. And I grieved and I was sad and I was angry and I questioned myself. And I said, is this ever going to get better? Am I ever going to get normal? And I just came to a point, probably sometime this time last year, after about maybe 7, 8 months of hiding, of severe anxiety. Like I had never been on anti-anxiety medication before, but this time I was because my anxiety was like so high. And I just said, I gotta live my life. I gotta live my life and I have to be okay. Even though I don't like what happened, I have to learn to be okay with what happened and what my ear looks like now. And so after I kind of made that mental shift, I started dressing up more. I pulled my hair up and I said, my ear is what it is. And if the people around me cannot accept it, and those are not the people, one, I need around me. And I have to swallow that pill that this is also a part of my lived experience of having a facial difference, of having golden heart syndrome, that when you go through surgery, especially reconstructive surgery, the face will adjust, it will change, you'll have to get it tweaked. Your body grows, it looks differently, and this is just a part of that process. Um, and people will stare, and they still stare. And some days I like even going to class, some days I'll go to class and I don't feel like putting makeup on my ear, and you're just gonna have to deal with it. And then some days I'm just like, I'll put makeup on it, just to give me like a little bit like less stress. Um, but knowing that I'm okay if I do or if I don't. And that just comes with the territory and being okay with that being with the territory. I think it's really, really that was a game changer for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting to that. I had Sora Kasuga on as a guest as well, and she said, she's just trying to get to kind of the neutral. And I think that's where I'm trying to be too. It's okay either way.
Now, don't get me wrong, there are still instances where I'm just like, because the staring is exhausting.
Yeah.
It's exhausting, and it's like you just like, I just want to show up in public and just be in peace. I was telling someone, I was at church the other week, and I guess I'm a new person in that church, so people really don't know me. They're not really familiar with my difference. And this lady was sitting next to me and my hair was kind of pulled back, so you see all the ear and all the scars. All of it was on display. I can kind of like make it a little bit invisible or kind of blend it in so it's not so affronting. But this time it was in full display because I just didn't feel like it that day. And that's okay. Like that's my choice. Um, and I could feel her staring at me. Like everyone with facial difference, we all have that common knowledge. Like we can feel when people are staring at us, like, and her stare wasn't like a stare of curiosity. Like I can literally feel her body energy, like twisting and turning. So, the pastor's like preaching, doing a sermon, and he's like, turn to your neighbor and say, this is something common in the Black church where, it's just call and response. So often you will hear turn to your neighbor and say whatever the pastor's telling you to say, like God bless you, whatever. And he said, turn to your neighbor, and she would not look at me.
Oh,
And at that moment, I was just part of me was like, if you would just stop being awkward about it, like you can just turn to me. I'm a normal person. Like I'm not a disease. I'm not going to infect you. And then the second part of me was like, well, maybe I should move my seat because if this is making her uncomfortable, her uncomfortability is now making me
right.
uncomfortable. But then I was just like, wait a minute. No, I'm sitting here. I'm not going to move my seat to make you uncomfortable. And if you don't want to speak, that's on you. That has nothing to do with me. And
No.
so, like Sora said, it's finding that neutral place where you're not hiding, but you're not also backing down from who you are and your
And
authenticity,
apologizing.
apologizing.
Yeah. I'm sorry that happened.
It happens a lot. It
Yeah.
happens a lot, but it's like you kind of have to learn, like, is this the battle that I want to sit on? Is this the hill
Yeah,
that
exactly.
that I
Exactly.
want
Well,
to
and I
stay?
think about how lucky I feel that we are in the digital age where we can find each other
Um,
to to find that safe space and land somewhere.
yeah,
Especially if you're somewhere new, right? Getting your
yeah,
PhD. Yeah.
yeah. The digital space has. I'm so glad I found it, and I found more community online than I have in person, to be completely honest. And
Yep.
I'm in some levels. I'm glad because it enabled me to connect to other people who have different types of facial differences or and disabilities. And it's like, well, if they're here and they're living their life, then I can be here too and live my life. And hopefully we can find space to come together. And I'm really intentional. Like I travel a lot for different like advocacy and speaking related things. And I always make an intention if I'm in the city and I know another person with a disability or facial difference lives in that city, I'm going to reach out to you and be like, hey, let's connect, let's talk. Because I know that for the most of us, we're like one in hundreds of thousands in our cities, in our schools, in our community. And just to be able to touch and see and be around another person, it just brings so much healing. It always does. So
Yeah.
if you're ever in Arizona, Hallie.
Okay, okay, noted. Yes, same with Boston.
Yeah.
Nice. So one of the reasons I decided to do this podcast and the album around this and finally just like find this narrative for myself was I put an EP out around the pandemic. You know, everybody had more of an online presence there, and I just kept getting reached out to by reality shows, especially the like surgery, the medical ones
Mm,
that would offer surgery, and you'd go on their show and they'd pay for it. It made me feel uncomfortable. That was like, is this how people are getting their health care now? Like they kind of spun it as like, we're doing really great things. These people, you know, people wouldn't otherwise be able to have access to these surgeries. Ultimately, the bigger story to me was what you touched upon earlier, which is so many of us, like with craniofacial conditions, every time we go and have surgery, you are you're weighing something,
mm,
right? You might lose something. You might lose something really important in order to gain something. So anyway, all this to say is it became really important to me to realize like I need to dig deeper into this and tell my story. But I think one aspect of it that I did not consider and I think needs to be talked about is that there's a lot of people who would like to get surgery
mm,
as adults who
mm,
cannot get it
mm,
because insurance will not cover it.
mm.
It is needed surgery. Um, and I'm just wondering if you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's heavy. I was on a reality TV show last year. It's called Botched, and I too was very adamant against the reality TV shows because I felt like it was exploitive of people, especially with um more significant forms disabilities and that were more visible. I was adamant against it, but after talking with my family and I was having some issues with, I had at the time a bone anchored cochlear implant and it was starting to get infected. And excuse me, I went through the procedure in 2018 initially and it was done well, but the site where the implant was sticking out to connect to the actual device, it was beginning to get infected. And I, at the time, I had just graduated. I didn't really have good insurance. And I was like, how the heck am I going to do this? Like, if it gets infected, where do I even go? The surgeon who did operate on me due to the pandemic, like 2018, then the pandemic, the whole healthcare landscape was different. So a lot of doctors that you were going to or the specialists you were seeing, a lot of them were either not practicing anymore. Hospitals weren't taking surgeries. I mean, it changed everything.
Absolutely.
Now I'm freaking out because I'm like, if this gets infected, like this thing is in my bone, that can travel to, like, it can cause so many other different health complications. And so it just so happened at that time when the TV show was reaching out to me, and I was like, no, no, I don't want to do it. And then finally, my mom was like, well, just think about it. And she was like, if they're offering to do this surgery for free, then maybe we can negotiate what you will do and what you won't do. And so they had presented me some options, and I was like, okay, I will do this and I will do that because those things I imagine the recovery time would be something that I can handle. Um, and so I went on a reality show and they filmed and they recorded and they did the surgery and there were some outcomes, like I said, that weren't the best and that I really had to work through, and some were kind of traumatic. I wouldn't necessarily blame that on the show or the producers. I just sometimes think, especially doctors, when they are not familiar, um, with our types of conditions, they always underestimate it. And so that was kind of one of those situations where there was an aspect that was significantly underestimated. And so I had to deal with that. I had to process through that traumatic aspect of the experience. I enjoyed recording because I like to talk. I enjoyed the whole experience, and the doctors, they were really nice and kind. Um, but I think what helped me through that process was I was sure in my own story.
Mm-hmm.
I was sure, and I think because I had had previous experience in talking with the media and sharing my story, um, I was very aware of when they were trying to take the narrative away from something that would make me be mocked. And I'm gonna tell y'all, I had so much anxiety because at the end of the day, it's like you don't know how they edit. And so it's like, but I was very clear in my answers, how I answered them, because I kept on telling my mom, "Mm, if any of you have seen the show Botched, it's an entertainment show, so people laugh." And I was like, I don't want to be laughed at. I don't want you to make my story as a mockery or make me as like a pitiful woman. But I was very surprised that out of all the stories that they did in that season, mine was not like that at all. And I think it was because of my prior experience and talking with the media and making sure that I'm not giving them any room to make fun of me. And so I like the way that they presented my story, but I do know that that's not the case for everyone. And I do recognize that TV and those opportunities are points of access for people to get the type of health care that they need. It gives people access. And in a way, it gave me access. Um, and so, my advice for any person going into that process is one, make sure you have a strong support system, like on all ends, not just physically, financially, because even though they pay for things, you still have to take up time for recovery. Um, Make sure you have a strong support system emotionally and psychologically, because I just spent a lot of time in therapy just from all the anxiety from recording the show that I had to wait a year until it to play out. And not knowing like how the public is going, like that's a lot of pressure, you
Yeah.
know? And so making sure you have a strong support system, get a counselor, get a therapist if you can, because I know that's not accessible to everyone. Who is in your community that you can feel safe to talk to and weigh all the options on every side. Now, I went through a lot of that process, but I wouldn't have been able to get through it had I not had a strong support system. Um, and then be very clear what you're willing to put up with, what you're willing to tolerate, and make sure you have someone there with you. Because in my instance, they allowed me to bring like um one family member, and then my mom came like on the side, but she wasn't actually recorded. Make sure you have someone there advocating for you. Sometimes a lot of people will go into these processes alone, and I will say this. Hollywood producers, Hollywood agents, a lot of them have been in the game for a long time. They know the talk, they know the contracts. Those contracts are ironclad. So make sure that you have someone by your side who can advocate, because the day after surgery, when they have that camera in your face and they're poking someone, you need someone to tell them enough. Let's record later. And sometimes that's not always easy to do, but it does help to have someone else in the room who can speak for you when you cannot speak for yourself. Um, and set your priorities, like I said, what you're willing to put up with, what you're willing to tolerate, and then what you're not. And also know at any time during the process you can say no and that you can walk away. And so I think for me, those are the main things that I would encourage anyone to pursue and embark on if you're thinking about going on a reality show and different things like that, to make sure you're also protected yourself, and try to enjoy the process.
Rashira, I saw somewhere else that you have had over 104 surgeries. Um, and one thing you talked about is the importance of having therapy. And I, for one, I'm a voice teacher as well, and I practice somatic voice works, really taking into account the whole body. And in learning how to do this and doing this training, I had like this huge aha moment where I was like, I didn't get any kind of physical therapy or anything. I only had 5 surgeries, but they were like, you've got tumors in your head. It's not like it's light surgery. And I was just thinking about this, all these, and I kept going further. Okay, there was no physical therapy after, there was no nothing. And I remember as a teenager being like, my body feels like it's been attacked by like a machete, like super dramatic. Like I could feel that my body was not okay, even mentally. I know after 2 weeks I was supposed to go back to school and stuff, but I was not okay. And but again, that didn't come until adulthood to look into that and like, oh my gosh, like what we really have to have these other modes of healing, right? Afterwards. So anyway, can you speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for therapy. And I tell anyone, if you have a disability, if you have a chronic illness, even if you think it's not bothering you on a daily basis, you need to talk to somebody anyways, because um, you'll be surprised what the body suppresses and how trauma, it can literally stay locked, not just emotionally in our body, but physically. And I also was not aware of that until, like I said, I became an adult well into my adulthood, and certain things like would trigger me, and I would just become on edge, or I would experience pain in my body. And really it was graduate school that set me on the path to therapy, and I'm going to graduate and I'm going to therapy telling the therapist like, I don't know why being back in school is triggering so much. Like I would have like crying spells, like go through a whole week of class, and then like on Friday after class is done, I'm like crying, like I don't know what's wrong. And I realized like the school environment was so triggering for me because I remember being a child in special ed and how I was treated and how I was stigmatized, and and those memories of what it was like to be the only disabled child in a classroom like came flooding back my mind. And so then I'm in graduate school, a full grown adult, thinking I'm still like a 6-year-old little girl in first grade, and I'm dealing with imposter syndrome and all of these different things. And I'm like, okay, I didn't get a handle on this because it was crippling. And then as I started to go into therapy for anxiety, then the therapist was like, so you've experienced a lot of medical trauma. Let's talk about that. And I'm like, oh, I guess I have, huh? And then it was through the conversations and just just talking about it. I think a lot of people with disabilities, especially if more chronic or significant, most of us are the only ones in our families and communities. And so there isn't a lot of space for us to really talk about it. It's like in a free space where we're not having to filter. And I think being in therapy was the first time I was able to say, this is how this really makes me feel. This hurt my feelings. But I wasn't able to have the freedom to say that, like with my mom or with a family member, because it's like, you have to filter sometimes to save people's feelings, or because sometimes, in my experience, um, unless you're disabled, people aren't ready for the truth and the reality of what it's like to be disabled. Like, it's one thing to listen empathetically, but it's another thing to listen because then you're taking on that person's pain. And you're just like, this is not what I thought it was. A prime example of that, um, I remember my mom and I were in the car and we were talking, I forget what we were talking about, and something of dating came up. And, I was like, well, my mom's like, "You're so beautiful, like, I don't understand." I was like, "Well, mommy, you're my mom, so you always will think that." But I was like, "There are people who are not you, who don't see my disability as beautiful, and they treat me differently because of it." And I think that was the first time, like, it registered in my mom's mind, this is a pain that you're dealing with like every single day. And I'm blinded to it, not because I don't see it, but because I'm your mother. And there's just like a certain like thing that I'm not able to see as your mother, but that is your lived experience. And so I had to talk about that in trauma, like what it's like to be stigmatized, what it's like to be stared at, the emotional and the mental toll that it can take on you mentally and psychologically. And then the physicality of trauma. Like I said a few minutes ago, going through the surgery last year, I was put on anti-anxiety medication. I was having trouble sleeping. If I would hear like a drill, I would like become startled. And my therapist was like, "Well, you're holding trauma in your body, and certain sounds are triggering that." And I was realized like I was internalizing that. So then, like I said, talking about it, being put on medication, working out, doing more physical things or other things to process that trauma out of my system. And so this is why, like, I take up things like I write poetry, I go walking sometimes, I started working out more, I started eating better, like doing things like getting massage or getting my nails done, doing things to put that love back on my body because I had experienced, like I like to call it medical violence. And so, yes, if you are a disabled person, if you're a chronically ill person, you have to, you need to go to therapy. This is not like you need to go to therapy, but like as a friend, as a person, community, you need to go to therapy to help you release
Mhm.
all of that comes with surgery, all that comes with medical treatment, all that comes with the daily in and out of having to experience stigma. Like we need places to release that from our body so we can be more whole and healthy human beings.
Absolutely. I think one thing that really I've gotten hung up on a little bit that stalled my healing for years was this idea of self-pity versus like grieving. And again, like one of the big stigmas or like tropes for people with disability, right, is like, oh, this pitiful person, da 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 da. Um, and so I felt the need, and I hear people say this a lot, I don't want your pity, right? One of the biggest things that therapy helped me with was realizing that that grieving process, you have to work through it. You
Yeah,
have to work through it. And you can then allow people to be compassionate toward you and help you and listen to you.
yeah,
Um, but if you never allow or deny, the sadness, the grief that comes of just of living, with a
yeah,
disability or difference.
yeah. And it can also come. I think, and I've learned to do this within the past year. I no longer adopt the trope strong warrior. Like, people like, oh, you're such a strong, you're a warrior. I'm like, no, I'm weak. I'm vulnerable. This hurts. And I say that intentionally, and I'm very transparent about that because I think those tropes indirectly rob disabled people of being able to feel. And then also, it takes the responsibility away from non-disabled people to actually be okay in sitting in the uncomfortable. And I have a friend whose background's in family and marriage therapy, so she is constantly like, cheers, just let yourself feel. And it's something I'm so resistant to because I've literally been trained all my life, like you're such a warrior, you're so strong. And so for now, for me to adopt feelings of vulnerability, of feelings of weakness, it's like, no, I need to allow myself to feel what this really had, the impact that it's had on me. And then I also need other people to know that it's okay if you're uncomfortable with it too. Um, and I think that has a lot to do with like internalized ableism and, people with disabilities having that pressure to feel like they have to overcome. And I told people I don't overcome my disability. I may overcome the barriers and the stigma attached to it, but there is nothing for me to overcome because this is my lived experience and it may not get better. If it does, great. But if it doesn't, like almost that false hope, or I don't even want to say false hope, managing the expectation that is related to your disability. And we don't want to be in fantasy when it comes to our disability because it creates an illusion and then eventually that illusion gets the bubble burst.
Right.
And you really do have to sit in the reality that I am disabled I have symptoms related to my disability. I have lived experience, and the quicker we are able to do that, the quicker, again, that we are able to live more fuller lives, being in the present and fully allowing ourselves to be human. Because that's what disability is. That's what a chronic illness is. That's what a facial difference is. It's simply an expression, a different expression of the human experience. And I think so many people with disabilities, we are often dehumanized, that people forget that we are human, which means we also go through the full range of motion or emotions when it comes to our human experiences. And that is okay. Like that is really okay. So yeah, therapy is important. It allows you to feel, it allows you to humanize your disability experience and not to make it something that's like some sort of phenomenon or this fantasy reality. No, you are human.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, after getting to that point of being able to grieve and talk about it, finding the people to talk about it with has been like the gift of my life. Not everybody is going to be able to sit with it. Like as you said, it's uncomfortable for some, but when you find the people that can,
Yeah,
um, and know that you can be that for them as well,
yeah,
it's like it's so special.
yeah, it is.
Tell me more about Beauty with a Twist. In the email to you, I was like, "Oh, you're really like an entrepreneur in that you're just creating things that you
Yeah,
need, right? That aren't
yeah,
around, and you are creating them." Um, like your podcast, you wrote this book, but Beauty with a Twist is really a lifestyle. It's a like a you know what I'm trying to say.
some people have been telling me I need to bring back Beauty with a Twist. And maybe I will. I first came out with it. It was started off as like a blog I did in 2016 when I really started coming into contact or really start sharing my story and kind of unpacking that. Um, and now, like you said, it's become a lifestyle. It's something that I embody that, um, I came up with it because, we all have grown up with these, again, tropes and images of what we perceive beauty to be.
Right.
What is considered a beautiful woman. In the magazines, we all remember reading 17 magazine. They're listing out all these things to make you the most beautiful. Now that I think about it, it's totally cringe because like, why are we reading this like at 17?
Yeah.
We all grew up watching America's Next Top Model and all these images and all these things that were presented before us, um, that are supposed to exemplify womanhood and beauty. And when I measured myself against those standards of beauty, I fell every single time. And this crushed my self-esteem, to the point that there was a time in my life I did not think I was beautiful. I did not think I was pretty. I knew I would never be. Um, and then I was like, you know what? This is like a really miserable outlook on life. Like, you're robbing me of an aspect of my womanhood because you're saying my appearance does not match the appearance that's being shown to me. And I just refuse to believe that. And so then I thought about beauty with a twist because I'm beautiful, but I'm different. And that's okay. And so I started blogging about, again, that my lived experience in living with a disability and how that made me feel like, and finding beauty in that disability, finding beauty in my ear deformity, finding difference and starting to see and look at difference, beauty, and appearance, not from the standard that is projected to us on TV and media, but more so looking at it from the inside out. And I realized like that is just one aesthetic. That is not the aesthetic. That is not the highest aesthetic. And that's okay. And it caused me to go deep and to root my self-esteem in something that was deeper than being superficial. And so for me, that was a game changer because it allowed me to be able to show up authentically in who I was and not to be intimidated by the pretty girl or whatever, and not to take away from her beauty, but knowing that her beauty isn't the only beauty that matters. My beauty matters too. Um, Ooh, I should coin that. Like that. And so, yeah, it's been a lifestyle for me. And so when I meet other disabled women and they share with me that I'm struggling because I don't look like, the typical woman, I was like, but your beauty matters too. Like your beauty is beautiful. It may not be that type of beauty, but it is another type of beauty. And we can't put limitations and all these standards around beauty. And so, um, maybe I'll bring that back 2020, 25. There's a lot of things on the table for 2025. Um, but I think there's a place for it because I can't even the beautiful thing about Beauty with a Twist is that it resonated not just with disabled women, but non-disabled women who were just like, I also feel awkward or unique, or I don't feel like I measure up to that standard of beauty. And you saying Beauty with a Twist gives me the space to be my own type of beautiful. And so I realized like self-esteem and appearance and beauty, these were markers that not just disabled women were also striving to get to, but able-bodied women were striving to as well. And if we can somehow create a community where disabled and able-bodied women can coexist and value each other's beauty reciprocally, then we can build a stronger sisterhood and we can have mutual respect for each other instead of being pitted against each other and having this hierarchy of beauty that just doesn't matter. So yeah, yeah, maybe I will bring that back in
And
2025.
it seems like it's been a really important evolution of your story too, of where you are right now, where it's
Yeah,
taken you. Yeah.
like I said last year, I had to redefine what does my beauty look like now that my ear is highly pigmented, and I struggled. Like I that's a whole other episode. Like I really struggled. Like it was a disruption to my self-esteem to having to go through surgery again, and it altered my appearance.
Mhm.
And then having to come back out in public and redefine what beauty meant for me now that I'm living with an altered appearance. Like,
I
that's
think,
hard to do.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I can only speak to it a little bit and why I ultimately had to stop getting surgeries, but I was changing. It's physically enough. There was enough being taken off each time, that my appearance was changing and it was messing with my head. I couldn't, yeah, I don't like even talking about it. I'm realizing I'm like, oh, that might be
Oh,
something to go to therapy about, but it really did kind of, it messes with you because you change a lot. Yeah. Okay, the final question we ask everybody is, do you have a point in your life that you would consider, or it could be multiple points, your spontaneous mutation?
I would say I mutated definitely last year. It's funny because I remember writing in my journal before I was going to surgery, I kept on telling my friend, I was like, when I go into the surgery, I'm going to come out a completely different person. Like, I don't know why, I just kept saying that. And I don't know why I just had that gut feeling that the surgery was going to be pivotal. Perhaps because I knew that I was coming across major points of transition. And the surgery just so aligned with those points of transition. Like I had the surgery, and then the next thing I know, I was accepted into the my PhD program, and then I moved across country. So it was like a lot of things like happening at once. Um, and then also because the surgery, I was something like I said, I had lived with a version of my ear since I was 7 years old, and now going through that process of changing it, that was really significant. And so that was my point of mutation. Like after they fix this ear, it's no going back, or not, I'm sorry, not fix. After they, reconstruct or do surgery on that ear, there's no going back to the old one.
Mhm.
Like, no matter how much I try, like this is it. And that's one of the things about surgery is like when you go through that process, you can't go back to the way your body was before. It's mutated, like you said. And that mutation process has been beautifully painful. Beautifully is grieving and it's gaining. It's something new and exploratory, but it's also something that's old and antiquated. It's something that's empowering and also something that's stigmatizing. It's both and realizing that we can be both and and that's humanity. That's how we grow. That's how we evolve, being two things at one time. And I love that we are in such a place in culture now where we are starting to hold space for those spheres of duality, where we're operating in one and still holding on to another, but that's okay. And so I can definitely say, embrace the moments of mutation, because those mutation, it leads to psychological, mental, and emotional evolution. That's the only way we do grow. Sometimes if we just to multiply ourselves, like even from having that surgery, I was able to do a children's book. I did not have it on my radar to do a children's book, but I was like, I want to do a children's book. And then I started a blog, and then I went to school and did all these research. So all these little things began to bloom after that one experience. And I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for the journey and the process. And I hope I continue to mutate. That's how we multiply, that's how we build, that's how we grow. And so yeah, I'm really grateful for the process.
Okay. Okay, that's it. I'm going to stop asking you questions. I have loved having you on, Rasheera. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Holly.
That was Rasheera Dopson, soon to be Dr. Rasheera Dopson. I'm so grateful to her for her insights. This was a big one for me because this took me a long time to learn. That you got to talk about stuff. You got to work through it. You can't hide from it. It will come and get you. It always does. And the thing with these lessons is that they always come back around. Anyway, I want to thank you all for listening today. There were some connectivity issues on my end, so I apologize for some of the static you hear toward the end of the interview. That's all me. But here's the really good news. You can go in the show notes and find Rasheera's awesome content. You can find links to her podcast. You can find links to her books. I'm also going to link to her guest blog on Alice Wong's Disability Visibility website. And to finish off, I wanted to give you a little activism opportunity. There is a bill called the Ensuring Lasting Smiles Act, which is H.R. 1916, and the bill requires private health insurance plans to cover diagnosis and treatment of congenital anomalies and birth defects, such as reconstructive services and items. A quick call to your elected official or an email would mean the world. Okay, thanks for tuning in. This has been Spontaneous Mutation.